Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. Today, we're in Science in the Bible. We're in Science in the Bible 2, Part 2, all right? So this is our spring semester, the second trip up. So you're going to need, if you're watching this, and we're going to know if you're watching it because I'm telling you now, I should have probably waited till the end, but you're going to need to comment at least a paragraph in the comments, and that's how we're going to know you watched this, okay? Thought about doing a premiere, interacting online and stuff like that. We're not going to do that, but you just comment, and then by your ethics and your faithfulness and truth in the gospel, we're going to trust you watch this from beginning to end. Take notes, all right? And you'll be getting some more direction on how you're going to get graded for this class. So what we're looking at is some proofs for a young earth. I like to joke it's a young earth after all. And we're on number 11. We did the first 10 in class when we were up there in February. Solar decomposition, we'll go over lunar recession, moon dust, planetary ring decomposition, Earth magnetic field depletion, the existence of comets and meteors because, you know, they're depleting rapidly, genetic decomposition, entropy, closed systems, symbiosis, the dependence on life upon life. We depend on plants, they depend on us, had to be created relatively simultaneously within a few days. Occam's razor fits the biblical account and what we see. The simplest answer that accounts for all known facts is usually correct, Occam's razor. Now we come into a field that is really booming in the creationist movement, and it's the laws of information technology. We know the reason computers are smart, you know, Deep Blue, Big Blue, defeating all these chess masters, Kasparov and all this, is because information is put into them. When you see information, it's because an outside source inserted that information. Information doesn't just happen. It doesn't just appear. That is testable and repeatable. You put a piece of wood down, you know, dead piece of wood, there's no information that appears. There has to be an outside force to put information. So now with DNA, 3.1 trillion pieces of information in a single strand of 100 trillion DNA in a human body, and all of it has information. We know that had to come from an outside source. Bacterium, flagellum, all of these other things that Darwin thought, and that was the scientific consensus of the day, that the smallest particles were just blobs and didn't consist of anything. We now know the smallest particles that we have, the smallest bacteria, will have like what scientists call 15 motors, 60 stomachs, that there's irreducible complexity. And so all of those things to function in unison have to have information encoded. And so it had to come from the source of all information, which is God. And so the more we learn about science, the more we should be in awe of God's creation. Number 12 is chance doesn't produce order. That violates the first two laws of thermodynamics. Chance, you know, doesn't produce order. If again you leave a piece of wood to itself, it just decomposes. You know what I'm saying? Things, the first law of thermodynamics, or things are going from a more ordered state to a less ordered state. This is known as entropy in scientific parlance. We call it theologically the fall, that there was perfection, sin entered, now things are disintegrating. And then the conservation of law and matter, that matter is neither formed nor lost, it just changes its dynamic. And so, but we know that chaos does not produce order. You don't blow up a metal factory and get encyclopedias or computers or typewriters or anything like that. Tornado in a junkyard, it doesn't happen. So things are, again, law of thermodynamics, things are going from a more ordered state to a less ordered state. Things are breaking down. Evolution would say things are getting better. They're not. Knowledge increase, that's a fulfillment of prophecy, Daniel 12:4. But that's irrelevant to any type of laws of chaos and chaos theory and the like. And so chaos does not produce order unless there's an outside force. When your room is full of chaos, it doesn't clean itself. It has to have something to come and order the chaos, all right? And so the implausibility of the Big Bang, actually a secular book I did a review on a few weeks ago about, they said this is impossible. The Big Bang, where was the dot? You have the dot. They used to call it the primeval atom. They come up with various names and then yell at you that you don't know the latest name that they assign to something that never existed. But anyhow, so where was the dot? If space and time was in the dot, then where was the dot? If it wasn't in space, where was the dot? What mechanism caused the dot to explode? Where did the dot come from? Where did the things that made up the dot, where did they come from? How can a dot with no mechanism of explosion explode and a dot be so condensed that all the matter in all the known universe and even the unknown universe, because we haven't reached the edges of the universe, exist inside the dot? The laws of angular momentum, when things explode, outer space is frictionless. It's frictionless. Things should continue to expand when the dot exploded. But yet, we say things began to accumulate together and made stars, made planets, made other various planetary objects and stellar objects. It doesn't work like that. And so it violates all known laws of logic, science, plausibility, testability, repeatability. Just couldn't have happened. And besides, even if you got everything in place with the sun, decompositioning 5 feet per second, all of these type things, it's impossible for a life to have come on planet Earth. So, without going into massive details, this is just logic. The implausibility of the Big Bang. There used to be the state theory, Sir Fred Hoyle and Chandra Ramsing had that, and then they were like, well, matter's eternal. In the Big Bang, matter's still eternal. So the basic propositions of life is matter plus time equals everything, or you can have God plus nothing equals everything. God plus nothing is far more plausible because it keeps with known observable laws of science, and that, like information technology, that order only comes from an orderer, and that chaos doesn't produce order. It goes back to that great book William Paley wrote in 1802, and you can still get it, Bill Cooper's edition, The Divine Watchmaker, that if you're walking through a peat moss bog in the UK and you see a Swiss watch, you don't say, wow, look what the peat moss bog produced. Intricate design. No, you say, who lost the watch? And then you realize the watch had to have a watchmaker. Cars have a car maker. Computers have a computer maker. Computer programmers have a designer. The ultimate design, far more complex than any of those things, had to have a grand designer, the unmoved mover of Aristotle, on and so forth. So the implausibility of the Big Bang. The next I'm going to give us, which is number 14 in our list, is mistaking variation with macroevolution. I didn't realize this was such a big deal till I started the YouTube channel and come out with very little watched creation videos, because when creation video, I don't know if it's the algorithm, I don't know if they think it's like flat earth or something, I have no idea. But they get very little views, maybe just nobody cares about creationism. That may be true. But it's a a biblical doctrine. It's the foundational doctrine of the Bible in a certain sense, that God is, and he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. But that within our DNA, God has the capacity for variation, environmental variations of all sorts. But the variations have genetic walls that never lead to another species. And so the confusing of microevolution, or variations within a species, with macroevolution, which is the transposing of a species. I mean, they're talking about like 1/8 of a millimeter differences in finches' beaks as proof of evolution. Well, if you study that really, and Jonathan Wells in Icons of Evolution goes into an amazing thing about how that is, variability, and how during times of drought, sometimes some of the finches fly to the mainland because their food source is cut off there, and only the longer billed finches can go. You know, it's just all, but they're not talking about finches turning into a pterodactyl. They're not talking about finches turning into a great blue whale. They're talking about 1/8 of a millimeter changes in a finch's beak as somehow proofs of evolution. The peppered moth, which that's been totally debunked as well. None of this existed. All right. So mistaking microevolution or variation with macroevolution is another reason people mistake for a long Earth instead of a short Earth. And the reason that they constantly keep expanding the age of the Earth and the universe is because they realize that, statistically speaking, Peter Stoner and these guys in the statistics, that it's statistically impossible for evolution to have occurred. Because they keep saying, well, given enough time, anything can happen. It's not true. Observably, given enough time, a leaf just decomposes, and not anything can happen. And so that's just demonstrably not true. That's why they came up with the multiverse theory, that the Big Bang exploded so much that it created an infinite or near infinite number of multiverses, or an unknown number of universes as well. And in one of the, we just happen to be in the genetic lottery that we're the one where life developed, because they realized time couldn't do the mechanism. Now they had to come up with multiverse. It's all just a shell game. 15 genetic walls, which we just mentioned, that God created genetic walls that cannot be changed, that cannot be crossed. And this is, you know, a horse is a horse, of course, the wonderful Mr. Ed. No, but a horse is a horse. A horse doesn't become a giraffe. We know, like Mendelian, that a giraffe is not a horse that was reaching for the top. That's not, DNA has encoded within it what the genetic walls that being is going to have, and we know that acquired characteristics are not passed down to other generations. You cut off a mice's tail, the DNA still says he's got a tail. You can do that hundreds and thousands of generations. All mice are going to be born with a tail. If you have your arm amputated, your offspring has no greater chance of being born without an arm than anything. So that was Mendelian genetics, which we may go into in just a little bit. The harmfulness of mutations, number 16. The mechanism of evolution is considered now to be mutations, but mutations cause harm. They do not cause benefits. Whenever you begin to put microwaves or gamma rays on DNA, it destroys the DNA. That's the reason that scientists have concluded that we can't be over 300 generations. At the end of the human species will be 300 generations because of the fall, because we have microscopic accretions of mutations that are like 0.0016 every generation. It's the reason people aren't living to be 900 and stuff now, besides better conditions before the flood and all of this, is our DNA is breaking down. Even if you take DNA for it's still the telomeres or whatever, it's still breaking down. And so this is just facts. This is what's happening. And so genetic walls and the harmfulness of mutations, they don't make better, they always destroy, basically. Long story. Topsoil depletion. Topsoil is very valuable. There couldn't be really human life on Earth without topsoil, the agriculture and all of this. Topsoil is very valuable, and they can measure the amount of topsoil that was in the past to make great estimates and what's now. And that's one of the things scientists worry about, is topsoil is depleting so rapidly on Earth. But the fact that there's topsoil shows that the Earth is very young, 6,000 years, probably 4,400 years in its current iteration. Niagara Falls is reaching back towards Lake Erie at 5 feet a year. If the Earth was much over, 6,000 years old, and if the flood happened much over 4,400 years ago, Niagara Falls would be in the Atlantic Ocean, but it's not, which shows us that that entire mechanism started very recently, somewhere around 4,000 plus years ago. Silt deposits. Now, you know this, that in the major earth rivers like the Nile and the Amazon and the Mississippi is constantly flooding when they hit the ocean with hundreds of thousands of tons of silt every year. And so if these mechanisms were much over a few thousand years of age, the entire places where they would be filled with silt. But they're not, because the mechanisms have only been going since the worldwide flood of Noah. Population statistics. It's estimated that at the time of Noah's flood, that there would be about 7.5 to 7.8 billion people on planet Earth. From the time of Noah's flood till now, accounting for famine and war, there should be about 7.8 billion people on planet Earth, which is exactly what you have, disease and all this, accounting for all that. And so if the Earth didn't have Noah's flood, and if man would have been on Earth for many thousands of years, not too many, like 10,000 years, there wouldn't be enough room in the solar system to put every person. In 1950, there was only 2 billion people on Earth. 70 years, there's 7.8 because of the population explosion. And this is with birth control, this is with abortion. It's still exploding. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be the population center of the world in the very near future if the Lord tarries. And so, population statistics. The Cambrian Explosion. You have the Precambrian era, and then you have the Cambrian Explosion, where everything is fully formed, fully filled, usually just much larger, and there's nothing preceding it. And that perplexes scientists, because there should be chains of things from protoplasm, protozoa, to, the giant moth, to the pterodactyl, to the flora and the fauna. That's megaflora and fauna, they call it. But there's not. None of those things exist. And so it's the Cambrian Explosion, looks very much like Genesis 1. Irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity, number 24. That again, the fact that, Darwin even was saying, if it could be proven that smallest particles were irreducibly complex, then his theory would fall. And so Michael Behe, this biochemist, the Biochemical Challenge to Evolution, he's just written another really good book, and Stephen Meyer writes books on this, show that the smallest particles are irreducibly complex. They're amazing. And so it's not going from a less ordered state to a more ordered state. The smallest things we can observe are already ordered. Really devastates evolution. And for this video, lastly, we're going to look at missing chains. People talk about the missing links. There's no missing links. There's missing chains. Like if they're supposed to be from a bird to a whale or vice versa, depends on which theory of evolution you follow and what the soup du jour flavor of the month is. Either way, there's no change. Darwin, I've read it. He said the fossil record should be full of the changes. But it's not. Everything you see in the fossil record is fully formed, fully filled, and you have these little things. Well, maybe this hip structure, maybe this eye structure a little bit, maybe these little hands, maybe, but you don't have any of the chain leading from one species to another. You have a speculation here or there that possibly this may have happened and have maybe one example, when you should have millions of examples of gradual permutations and everything in between that they should look like. Doesn't exist. So the earth is very young. It's just like God said in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Don't let anybody ever tell you differently. God's word is true, and he is not a liar. Talk with you later in Jesus' name.